Okay, let's talk Raiders. Why don't we? Yes, the Raiders had a very interesting draft class. As we've talked about this offseason, almost being like the quest to become competent again, the quest to just be good, right? They don't seem like they're shooting for the stars necessarily, going after a franchise quarterback or anything like that. But let's just try and walk, and then we can start to run. And let's start off with, speaking of running, with their first overall, or their first selection. So first, just so you know what you're looking at next to me, this is the first number you're going to see is where the player was selected, then the player name, their position, and finally, where they were projected to go according to the consensus big board. Sometimes it helps to compare those two numbers. Ashton Jeanty, fifth best prospect, goes sixth here. And again, there's the whole running back value discussion, which is a discussion that's totally worth having. It is. I mean, and we can have it a little bit here. Like, the downsides are the downsides, which is you don't save as much money because running backs don't get paid. So, it's not as valuable of a draft pick that way. You don't have as long of a shelf life. And there is value. Running backs have a certain amount of value. Typically, the fan bases of the teams think the running backs are more valuable than they actually are, which that's very nuanced, but that is a thing that does happen. Ashton Jeanty is an awesome running back, though. And again, the value of a running back can be debated, but the quality of running back they are getting cannot. I do see him as a Marshawn Lynch type player. I think he's going to be awesome, and I totally get this pick and why they're making it, and that's coming from someone who doesn't typically value running backs the way other people do. Then at pick 58, they went with Jack Beck, which is interesting because you would think that they're already pretty good at working over the middle, right? You have Jacoby Myers, you have Brock Bowers, but listen, they want to run the ball. They want to have these over-the-middle plays. Maybe they feel someone there can win on the outside. Maybe Brock Bowers is their outside receiver. Why not, honestly? That's probably the logic there. Maybe, I don't know, but that's interesting. Then at pick 68, they go Darian Porter, the cornerback out of Iowa State. So he's a really interesting player. So he used to be a wide receiver because, 6'4", runs a 4.3 flat. Like, that's crazy, right? Just those things are amazing. The issue is he only played 425 snaps at corner last year and barely any before that because he transitioned from receiver late. So the athleticism is through the charts. I think just the question you have to ask is, okay, can he play football? Which is a pretty important question. But I would compare him a bit to Jordan Mailata, who was a 7th-round pick, so a little different there. But Jordan Mailata was an offensive lineman who had never played football, coming over, getting drafted by the Eagles just because his body type is oh, this could be a ridiculous football player. If we teach him how to play, they taught him how to play, and yes, he was a ridiculous player. There's some similarities here with Porter. Will it work out the same? Well, we will see. But yeah, that's what I find interesting there. Then they went with Caleb Rogers, which is a bit of a head scratcher. I'm literally scratching my head. I wasn't doing that intentionally as it happened. Caleb Rogers is a guy who projected to go 182nd. They get him at 98th, which, hey, the consensus big board is not the end-all be-all, but historically, when a guy who was supposed to go 180 goes 100, then they play like a guy who was supposed to go 180. That's usually how it works. Rogers is essentially a project. His blocking isn't great as an offensive lineman, but also he does have the physical traits to be good. He is completely a guy who they are hoping they can coach up, and if they can do that, then things will be hopefully pretty good. And what's interesting is they then went the complete opposite way, kind of, going with Charles Grant, who is also another really good athlete and someone who might need some coaching as well, to be honest. So that part's the same. But he has a ton of production. At William and Mary is where he had the production. So not exactly going up against SEC level talent. That is why he ultimately fell, but he was projected to go 87th. They get him at 99, so they do get kind of on the right side there before we're going to have a couple more quote-unquote reaches. So first you have Dante Thornton, who is a player who has explosive speed. I believe he runs a 4.3, so you love that about him. The issue is that's kind of all he is, which is why he was projected to go 171st. He's another guy that they're going to hope to develop, right? Which some teams like these guys, and clearly you can tell that that's kind of what Pete Carroll is thinking. He trusts himself as a coach and trusts his coaching staff and wants to be able to coach players up. And again, the logic is we don't need all these guys to hit. Can we get some of them to hit? At least with Thornton, though, he should be a pretty good special teams guy, you would think, with the speed, if he doesn't end up being a great player. But ultimately, usually you don't draft a special teams guy at 108. They want him to be a good receiver. Maybe he is the downfield threat. We can see. Tonka Hemingway, which is an awesome name, is the next player who gets drafted. 290-pound interior defensive lineman, or is he an edge? What do you do here? Kind of has it moves very well for his size, but ultimately, what do you do in that situation? He's not really an interior guy, not really an edge guy. You're going to have to figure something out. So again, like the athleticism, but again, was projected to go 222nd. You're getting him at pick 135. It's a choice. I don't know if it's a choice I would have made, but it is the choice that they decide to make. They then got a guy who, I feel like this is the guy who, okay, at least you're getting someone who probably should be a valuable piece. Like, he'll be someone who should be on the roster for the 4 years of the rookie contract, if nothing else. Should be a pretty good run-defending interior defensive lineman. I don't know if you're expecting him to do a ton more than that, but for a 300 snap a year guy at pick 180, that's pretty good value to get someone who should still be a contributor. Next up, and this is interesting, they draft multiple quarterbacks. Yes, you heard me correctly. Multiple quarterbacks with their next 2 picks. So Tommy Malone, who, is listed as quarterback. It seems, he's a really good athlete. It seems as though he is not someone they actually want to draft at quarterback, or play at quarterback, excuse me. He is someone who there is, hey, maybe it can work at the quarterback position, but I think they're trying to transition him to probably wide receiver. That's what I'm assuming happens there. So again, Pete Carroll trusting his coaching staff, seeing if he can develop someone. Cam Miller, I actually don't know. I think that he is someone that maybe they trust as a potential backup quarterback or someone who could work. So he was a North Dakota State University guy, similar to Carson Wentz, similar to Trey Lance. And I think after Trey Lance didn't work, teams are going to be less likely to go after these guys. Although Trey Lance was also a great athlete, Cam Miller is not that. In fact, people wonder if he has the arm strength to work at the next level. Ultimately, though, he is someone who did dominate at that level. And so, hey, for pick 215, I suppose there's worse things you can do than get someone who maybe has some potential. At pick 222, they went with Cody Lindenberg, who maybe they like as a linebacker or even some other, maybe even as a safety if you want to have him try that. But ultimately, I think he is going to be a special teams player is where they're going. So ultimately, a very bizarre draft. I really liked, especially the Jack Beck pick at pick 58. There's a couple other that I thought were really good. And then a lot of, they're really trusting their coaching staff, which, hey, I'm sure some people will say, well, I trust Pete Carroll knows what he's doing. This is how they've gotten, with Seattle. How many times when they built the Legion of Boom was oh, this guy was a late pick, this guy was a late pick. That works sometimes, but ultimately you could also swing and miss. The good thing, though, and why my favorite thing about this draft, to be honest, is just how many picks they have. I mean, they have 11, 12 picks. I'm not going to count it, but it's a good amount of picks to have. And so ultimately, they don't need all of these to hit. And that's why ultimately I think it's a draft that probably they will get some good players out of. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.